Salaman and Absal. By Jámi. Preface. My dear Cowl. 2 years ago, when we began, for the first time, to read this poem together, I wanted you to translate it, as something that should interest a few who are worth interesting. You, however, did not see the way clear then, and had Aristotle pulling you by one shoulder and Verrucci by the other. So as indeed to have hindered you up to this time completing a version of Hafiz's best odes which you had then happily begun. So, continuing to like old Jámi more and more, I must try my hand upon him, and here is my reduced version of a small original. What scholarship it has is yours, my master in Persian and so much beside. Who are no further answerable for all than by well liking and wishing published what you may scarce have leisure to find due fault with. Had all the poem been like parts, it would have been all translated, and in such prose lines as you measure Hafiz in. And such as any one should adopt who does not feel himself so much of a poet as him he translates and some he translates for, before whom it is best to lay the raw material as genuine as may be, to work up to their own better fancies. But, unlike Hafiz's best, whose sonnets are sometimes as close-packed as Shakespeare's, which they resemble in more ways than one, Jámi, you know, like his countrymen generally, is very diffuse in what he tells and his way of telling it. The very structure of the Persian couplet, here, like people on the stage, I am repeating to you what you know, with an eye to the small audience beyond, so often ending with the same word, or two words. If but the foregoing syllables secure a lawful rhyme, so often makes the second line but a slightly varied repetition, or modification of the first, and gets slowly over ground often hardly worth gaining. This iteration is common indeed to the Hebrew Psalms and Proverbs, where, however, the value of the repetition is different. In your Hafiz also, not 2 only, but 8 or 10 lines perhaps are tied to the same close of 2, or 3, words. A verbal ingenuity as much valued in the East as better thought. And how many of all the odes called his, more and fewer in various copies, do you yourself care to deal with? And in the better ones how often some lines, as I think for this reason, unworthy of the rest, interpolated perhaps from the mouths of his many devotees. Mystical and sensual, or crept into manuscripts of which he never arranged or corrected one from the first. This, together with the confined action of Persian grammar, whose organic simplicity seems to me its difficulty when applied, makes the line-by-line translation of a poem not line-by-line precious tedious in proportion to its length. Especially, what the sonnet does not feel, in the narrative. Which I found when once eased in its collar, and yet missing somewhat of rhythmical amble, somehow, and not without resistance on my part, swerved into that easy road of verse, easiest as unbeset with any exigencies of rhyme. Those little stories, too, which you thought untractable, but which have their use as well as humor by way of quaint interlude music between the little acts, felt ill at ease in solemn Isaiah prose, and had learned their tune, you know. Before even Hiawatha came to teach people to quarrel about it. Till, one part drawing on another, the whole grew to the present form. As for the much bodily omitted, it may be readily guessed that an Asiatic of the 15th century might say much on such a subject that an Englishman of the 19th would not care to read. Not that our Jámi is ever licentious like his contemporary Chaucer, nor like Chaucer's posterity in times that called themselves more civil. But better men will not now endure a simplicity of speech that worse men abuse. Then the many more, and foolisher, stories, preliminary Te Deums to Allah and Allah's shadow Shah, very much about Aleph noses, eyebrows like inverted nuns. Drunken Narcissus eyes, and that eternal moon face which never wanes from Persia, of all which there is surely enough in this glimpse of the original. No doubt some oriental character escapes, the story sometimes becomes too skin and bone without due interval of even stupid and bad. Of the two evils, at least what I have chosen is least in point of bulk. Scarcely in proportion with the length of its apology which, as usual, probably discharges one's own conscience at too great a price, people at once turning against you the arms they might have wanted had you not laid them down. However it may be with this, I am sure a complete translation, even in prose, would not have been a readable one, which, after all, is a useful property of most books, even of poetry. In studying the original, one gets contentedly carried over barren ground in a new land of language, excited by chasing any new game that will but show sport. The most worthless to win, asking perhaps all the sharper energy to pursue, and so far yielding all the more satisfaction when run down. Especially, cheered on as I was by such a huntsman as poor dog of a Persian scholar never hunted with before. And moreover, but that was rather in the Spanish Sierras, by the presence of a lady in the field, silently brightening about us like Aurora's self, or chiming in with musical encouragement that all we started and ran down must be royal game. Ah, happy days! When shall we three meet again, when dip in that unreturning tide of time and circumstance? In those meadows far from the world, it seemed, as Solomon's Island, before an iron railway broke the heart of that happy valley whose gossip was the mill wheel. And visitors the summer airs that momentarily ruffled the sleepy stream that turned it as they chased one another over to lose themselves in whispers in the copse beyond. Or returning, I suppose you remember whose lines they are. When winter skies were tinged with crimson still, where thornbush nestles on the quiet hill, and the live amber round the setting sun, lighting the laborer home whose work is done, burned like a golden angel ground above, the solitary home of peace and love. At such an hour drawing home together for a fireside night of it with Aeschylus or Calderon in the cottage, whose walls, modest almost as those of the poor who clustered, and with good reason, round, make to my eyes the towered crown of Oxford hanging in the horizon, and with all honour one, but a dingy vapour in comparison. And now, should they beckon from the terrible Ganges, and this little book begun as a happy record of past, and pledge perhaps of future, fellowship in study, darken already with the shadow of everlasting farewell. But to turn from you two to a public, nearly as numerous, with whom, by the way, this letter may die without a name that you know very well how to supply, here is the best I could make of Jami's poem, Ouvrage de peu d'étendue. Says the Biographie Universelle, and, whatever that means, here collapsed into a nutshell epic indeed. Whose story however, if nothing else, may interest some scholars as one of Persian mysticism, perhaps the grand mystery of all religions, an allegory fairly devised and carried out, dramatically culminating as it goes on. And told as to this day the East loves to tell her story, illustrated by fables and tales, so often, as we read in the latest travels, at the expense of the poor Arab of the desert. The proper names, and some other words peculiar to the East, are printed as near as may be to their native shape and sound, Salaman for Solomon, Yusuf for Joseph, etc. As being not only more musical, but retaining their Oriental flavor unalloyed with European association. The accented vowels are to be pronounced long, as in Italian, Salaman, Absal, Shiren, etc. The original is in rhymed couplets of this measure, which those who like monkish Latin may remember in Du Solomon verba regis cogitat, pectus intra de profundis estuat. Or in English, by way of asking, your clemency for us and for our tragedy. Of Salaman and of Absal hear the song. Little wants man here below, nor little long. How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content. Life of Jámi. I hope the following disproportionate notice of Jami's life will be amusing enough to excuse its length. I found most of it at the last moment in Rosenzweig's Biographische Notizen of Jámi, from whose own, and commentators, works it purports to be gathered. Nuruddin Abdurrahman, son of Maulana Nizamuddin I Ahmed, and descended on the mother's side from one of the four great fathers of Islamism, was born AH 817 AD. 1414, in Jam, a little town of Khorasan, whither, according to the Heft Aklam, 7 climates, his grandfather had migrated from Desht of Ispahan, and from which the poet ultimately took his Takalis, or poetic name, Jámi. This word also signifies a cup, wherefore, he says, born in Jam, and dipped in the jam of holy lore, for a double reason I must be called Jámi in the Book of Song. He was celebrated afterwards in other Oriental titles, Lord of Poets, Elephant of Wisdom, and, but often liked to call himself, the Ancient of Herat, where he mainly resided. When 5 years old he received the name of Nuruddin, the Light of Faith, and even so early began to show the metal, and take the stamp that distinguished him through life. In 1419, a famous sheikh, Khwaja Mehmed Parsa, then in the last year of his life, was being carried through Jam. I was not then 5 years old, says Jámi, and my father, who with his friends went forth to salute him, had me carried on the shoulders of one of the family and set down before the litter of the sheikh, who gave a nosegay into my hand. 60 years have passed, and methinks I now see before me the bright image of the holy man, and feel the blessing of his aspect, from which I date my after devotion to that brotherhood in which I hope to be enrolled. So again, when Maulana Fakhruddin Loristani had alighted at his mother's house, I was then so little that he set me upon his knee, and with his fingers drawing the letters of Ali and Omar in the air, laughed delightedly to hear me spell them. He also by his goodness sowed in my heart the seed of his devotion, which has grown to increase within me, in which I hope to live, and in which to die. O God! Dervish let me live, and dervish die. And in the company of the dervish do thou quicken me to life again. Jámi first went to a school at Herat, and afterward to one founded by the great Timur at Samarkand. There he not only outstripped his fellows in the very encyclopedic studies of Persian education, but even puzzled the doctors in logic, astronomy, and theology, who, however, with unresenting gravity welcomed him, lo! A new light added to our galaxy. In the wider field of Samarkand he might have liked to remain, but destiny liked otherwise, and a dream recalled him to Herat. A vision of the great Sufi master there, Mem Sadaduddin Kashgari, of the Naqshband order of dervishes, appeared to him in his sleep, and bade him return to one who would satisfy all desire. Jámi went back to Herat. He saw the sheikh discoursing with his disciples by the door of the great mosque. Day after day passed by without daring to present himself, but the master's eye was upon him. Day by day draws him nearer and nearer, till at last the sheikh announces to those about him, lo! This day have I taken a falcon in my snare. Under him Jámi began his Sufi novitiate, with such devotion, and under such fascination from the master, that going, he tells us, but for one summer day's holiday into the country, one single line was enough to lure the tassel gentle back again. Lo! Here am I, and thou look'st on the rose. By and by he withdraws, by course of Sufi instruction, into solitude so long and profound, that on his return to men he has almost lost the power of converse with them. At last, when duly taught, and duly authorized to teach as Sufi doctor, he yet will not, though solicited by those who had seen such a vision of him as had drawn himself to Herat. And not till the evening of his life is he to be seen with white hairs taking that place by the mosque which his departed master had been used to occupy before. Meanwhile he had become poet, which no doubt winged his reputation and doctrine far and wide through nations to whom poetry is a vital element of the air they breathe. 1,000 times, he says, I have repented of such employment. But I could no more shirk it than one can shirk what the pen of fate has written on his forehead. As poet I have resounded through the world. Heaven filled itself with my song, and the bride of time adorned her ears and neck with the pearls of my verse, whose coming caravan the Persian Hafiz and Sadi came forth gladly to salute. And the Indian Khosrow and Hassan hailed as a wonder of the world. The kings of India and Rum greet me by letter, the lords of Iraq and Tabriz load me with gifts, and what shall I say of those of Khorasan, who drown me in an ocean of munificence? This, though Oriental, is scarcely bombast. Jámi was honored by princes at home and abroad, and at the very time they were cutting one another's throats, by his own Sultan Abu Sa'id, by Hassan Beg of Mesopotamia, lord of Tabriz, by whom Abu Sa'id was defeated, dethroned, and slain. By Muhammad II of Turkey, king of Rum, who in his turn defeated Hassan, and lastly by Husayn Mirza Baikara, who extinguished the prince whom Hassan had set up in Abu's place at Herat. Such is the house that Jack builds in Persia. As Hassan Beg, however, the Usankasan of old European annals, is singularly connected with the present poem, and with probably the most important event in Jami's life. I will briefly follow the steps that led to that as well as other princely intercourse. In AH 877, AD 1472, Jami set off on his pilgrimage to Mecca. He, and, on his account, the caravan he went with, were honorably and safely escorted through the intervening countries by order of their several potentates as far as Baghdad. There Jami fell into trouble by the treachery of a follower he had reproved, and who, born 400 years too soon, misquoted Jami's verse into disparagement of Ali, the darling Imam of Persia. This getting wind at Baghdad, the thing was brought to solemn tribunal, at which Hassan Beg's 2 sons assisted. Jami came victoriously off. His accuser pilloried with a docked beard in Baghdad marketplace, but the poet was so ill pleased with the stupidity of those who believed the report, that, standing in verse upon the Tigris side, he calls for a cup of wine to seal up lips of whose utterance the men of Baghdad were unworthy. After 4 months' stay there, during which he visits at Hela the tomb of Ali's son, Husain, who had fallen at Kerbala, he sets forth again, to Najaf, where he says his camel sprang forward at sight of Ali's own tomb, crosses the desert in 22 days. Meditating on the Prophet's glory, to Medina. And so at last to Mecca, where, as he sang in a ghazal, he went through all Mohammedan ceremony with a mystical understanding of his own. He then turns homeward, is entertained for 45 days at Damascus, which he leaves the very day before the Turkish Muhammad's envoys come with 5,000 ducats to carry him to Constantinople. Arriving at Amida, the capital of Mesopotamia, Dayak Bakar, he finds war broken out in full flame between that Muhammad and Hassan Beg, king of the country, who has Jami honorably escorted through the dangerous roads to Tabriz. There receives him in divan, frequent and full of sage and noble, Hassan being a great admirer of learning, and would fain have him abide at court a while. Jami, however, is intent on home, and once more seeing his aged mother, for he is turned of 60, and at last touches Herat in the month of Shaban, 1473, after the average year's absence. This is the Hassan, in name and nature handsome, and so described by some Venetian ambassadors of the time, of whose protection Jami speaks in the preliminary vision of this poem, which he dedicates to Hassan's son, Yaqub Beg, who, after the due murder of an elder brother, succeeded to the throne. Till all the dynasties of black and white sheep together were swept away a few years after by Ismail, founder of the Sofi dynasty in Persia. Arrived at home, Jami finds Husain Mirza Baikara, last of the Timuridi, fast seated there. Having probably slain ere Jami went the prince whom Hassan had set up, but the date of a year or two may well wander in the bloody jungle of Persian history. Husain, however, receives Jami with open arms. Nisamuddin Ali Shir, his vizier, a poet too, had hailed in verse the poet's advent from Damascus as the moon rising in the west, and they both continued affectionately to honor him as long as he lived. Jami sickened of his mortal illness on the 13th of Muharram, 1492, a Sunday. His pulse began to fail on the following Friday, about the hour of morning prayer, and stopped at the very moment when the muezzin began to call to evening. He had lived 81 years. Sultan Husain undertook the burial of one whose glory it was to have lived and died in dervish poverty. The dignities of the kingdom followed him to the grave, where 20 days afterward was recited in presence of the Sultan and his court an eulogy composed by the vizier, who also laid the first stone of a monument to his friend's memory, the first stone of Tarbat-i-Jami, in the street of Mesht, a principal thoroughfare of the city of Herat. For, says Rosenzweig, it must be kept in mind that Jami was reverenced not only as a poet and philosopher, but as a saint also, who not only might work a miracle himself, but leave the power lingering about his tomb. It was known that once in his life, an Arab, who had falsely accused him of selling a camel he knew to be mortally unsound, had very shortly after died, as Jami had predicted, and on the very selfsame spot where the camel fell. And that libelous rogue at Baghdad, he, putting his hand into his horse's nose-bag to see if Das Thier has finished his corn, had his forefinger bitten off by the same, von Demselben der Zeigfinger abgebissen, of which, Verstumlung, he soon died, I suppose, as he ought, of lockjaw. The Persians, who are adepts at much elegant ingenuity, are fond of commemorating events by some analogous word or sentence whose letters, cabalistically corresponding to certain numbers, compose the date required. In Jámi's case they have hit upon the word cas, a cup, whose signification brings his own name to memory, and whose relative letters make up his 81 years. They have tarikhs also for remembering the year of his death. Rosenzweig gives some. But Ausli the prettiest, if it will hold. Az Khorasan bar aimed. The smoke of sighs went up from Khorasan. No biographer, says Rosenzweig cautiously, records of Jámi that he had more than one wife, granddaughter of his master Sheikh, and 4 sons, which, however, are 5 too many for the doctrine of this poem. Of the sons, 3 died infant. And the 4th, born to him in very old age, and for whom he wrote some elementary tracts, and the more famous, Beharistan, lived but a few years, and was remembered by his father in the preface to his Karadname Iskander, a book of morals, which perhaps had also been begun for the boy's instruction. Of Jámi's wonderful fruitfulness, Bewunderungswerther Fruchtbarkeit, as writer, Rosenzweig names 44 offsprings, the letters of the word jam completing by the aforesaid process that very number. But Shah Khan Ludi in his Memoirs of the Poets, says Ausli, counts him author of 99 volumes of grammar, poetry, and theology, which continue to be universally admired in all parts of the Eastern world, Iran, Turan, and Hindustan, copied some of them into precious manuscript, illuminated with gold and painting, by the greatest penmen and artists of the time. One such, the Beharistan, said to have cost thousands of pounds, autographed as one most precious treasure of their libraries by 2 sovereign descendants of Timur upon the throne of Hindustan. And now reposit away from the drums and tramplings of Oriental conquest in the tranquil seclusion of an English library. Of these 99, or 44 volumes few are known, and none except the present and one other poem ever printed, in England, where the knowledge of Persian might have been politically useful. The poet's name with us is almost solely associated with Yusuf and Zuleika, which, with the other 2 I have mentioned, count 3 of the brother stars of that constellation into which Jámi, or his admirers, have clustered his 7 best mystical poems under the name of Heft Orang, those 7 thrones, to which we of the West and North give our characteristic name of Great Bear and Charles's Wain. He must have enjoyed great favor and protection from his princes at home, or he would hardly have ventured to write so freely as in this poem he does of doctrine which exposed the Sufi to vulgar abhorrence and danger. Hafiz and others are apologized for as having been obliged to veil a divinity beyond what the prophet dreamt of under the figure of mortal cup and cupbearer. Jámi speaks in Allegory too, by way of making a palpable grasp at the skirt of the ineffable, but he also dares, in the very thick of Mohammedanism, to talk of reason as sole fountain of prophecy, and to pant for what would seem so pantheistic an identification with the deity as shall blind him to any distinction between good and evil. 2. I must not forget one pretty passage of Jámi's life. He had a nephew, one Maulana Abdullah, who was ambitious of following his uncle's footsteps in poetry. Jámi first dissuaded him, then, by way of trial whether he had a talent as well as a taste, bid him imitate Ferdowsi's satire on Shah Mahmud. The nephew did so well, that Jámi then encouraged him to proceed, himself wrote the first couplet of his first, and most noted, poem, Layla and Majnun. This book of which the pen has now laid the foundation. May the diploma of acceptance one day befall it. And Abdullah went on to write that and 4 other poems which Persia continues and multiplies in fine manuscript and illumination to the present day. Remembering their author under his Takalas of Hatafi, the voice from heaven and last of the so reputed Persian poets. Salaman and Absal. 1. Prologue. O thou whose memory quickens lovers' souls, whose fount of joy renews the lover's tongue. Thy shadow falls across the world, and they bow down to it. And of the rich in beauty, thou art the riches that make lovers mad. Not till thy secret beauty through the cheek of Layla smite does she inflame Majnun. And not till thou have sugared Shiren's lip. The hearts of those two lovers fill with blood. For loved and lover are not but by thee. Nor beauty. Mortal beauty but the veil. Thy heavenly hides behind, and from itself feeds, and our hearts yearn after as a bride. That glances past us veiled, but ever so. As none the beauty from the veil may know. How long wilt thou continue thus the world? To cozen with the phantom of a veil. From which thou only peepest, time it is. To unfold thy perfect beauty. I would be thy lover, and thine only, mine eyes. Sealed in the light of thee to all but thee. Yea, in the revelation of thyself. Self-lost, and conscience quit of good and evil. Thou movest under all the forms of truth. Under the forms of all created things. Look whence I will, still nothing I discern. But thee in all the universe, in which thyself thou dost invest, and through the eyes of man, the subtle censor scrutinize. To thy harem individuality no entrance finds, no word of this and that. Do thou my separate and derived self make one with thy essential. Leave me room on that divan which leaves no room for two. Lest, like the simple Kurd of whom they tell, I grow perplexed, O God. Twixt I and thou. If I, this dignity and wisdom whence? If thou, then what this abject impotence? A Kurd perplexed by fortune's frolics. Left his desert for the city. Sees a city full of noise and clamor, agitated people. Hither, thither, back and forward. Running, some intent on travel. Others home again returning. Right to left, and left to right. Life disquiet everywhere. Kurd, when he beholds the turmoil, creeps aside, and, travel weary, fain would go to sleep, but, saith he, how shall I in all this hubbub know myself again on waking? So by way of recognition, ties a pumpkin round his foot, and turns to sleep. A knave that heard him crept behind, and slyly watching, slips the pumpkin off the sleeper's ankle, ties it round his own, and so down to sleep beside him. By and by the Kurd awaking, looks directly for his signal, sees it on another's ankle, cries aloud, O good for nothing rascal to perplex me so, that by you I am bewildered, whether I be I or no. If I, the pumpkin why on you? If you, then where am I, and who? O God! This poor bewildered Kurd am I. Than any Kurd more helpless, oh, do thou strike down a ray of light into my darkness. Turn by thy grace these dregs into pure wine, to recreate the spirits of the good. Or if not that, yet, as the little cup, whose name I go by, not unworthy found, to pass thy salutary vintage round. 2. And yet how long, Jami, in this old house, stringing thy pearls upon a harp of song, year after year striking up some new song, the breath of some old story. Life is gone, and yet the song is not the last, my soul is spent, and still a story to be told. And I, whose back is crooked as the harp, I still keep tuning through the night till day. That harp untuned by time, the harper's hand shaking with age, how shall the harper's hand repair its cunning, and the sweet old harp be modulated as of old? Methinks 'tis time to break and cast it in the fire. Yea, sweet the harp that can be sweet no more. To cast it in the fire, the vain old harp, that can no more sound sweetness to the ear, but burned may breathe sweet attar to the soul, and comfort so the faith and intellect. Now that the body looks to dissolution, my teeth fall out, my two eyes see no more. Till by Ferengi glasses turn to four. Pain sits with me sitting behind my knees, from which I hardly rise unhelped of hand. I bow down to my root, and like a child, yearn, as is likely, to my mother earth, with whom I soon shall cease to moan and weep, and on my mother's bosom fall asleep. The house in ruin, and its music heard no more within, nor at the door of speech. Better in silence and oblivion to fold me head and foot, remembering what that beloved to the master whispered. No longer think of rhyme, but think of me. Of whom? Of him whose palace the soul is, and treasure house, who notices and knows its income and outgoing, and then comes to fill it when the stranger is departed. Whose shadow being kings, whose attributes the type of theirs, their wrath and favor his. Lo! In the celebration of his glory, the king himself come on me unaware, and suddenly arrests me for his own. Wherefore once more I take, best quitted else, the field of verse, to chaunt that double praise, and in that memory refresh my soul, until I grasp the skirt of living presence. One who traveled in the desert saw Majnun where he was sitting, all alone like a magician, tracing letters in the sand. O distracted lover, writing what the sword wind of the desert undeciphers soon as written, so that none who travels after shall be able to interpret. Majnun answered, I am writing Lily, were it only Lily, yet a book of love and passion, and, with but her name to dote on, amorously I caress it, as it were herself, and sip her presence till I drink her lip. 3. When night had thus far brought me with my book, in middle thought sleep robbed me of myself, and in a dream myself I seemed to see, walking along a straight and even road, and clean as is the soul of the Sufi, a road whose spotless surface neither breeze lifted in dust, nor mixed the rain to mire. There I, methought, was pacing tranquilly, when, on a sudden, the tumultuous shout of soldiery behind broke on mine ear, and took away my wit and strength for fear. I looked about for refuge, and behold, a palace was before me, whither running for refuge from the coming soldiery. Suddenly from the troop a Shahsman, by name and nature Hassan, on the horse of honor mounted, robed in royal robes, and wearing a white turban on his head, turned his rein toward me, and with smiling lips opened before my eyes the door of peace. Then, riding up to me, dismounted, kissed my hand, and did me courtesy, and I, how glad of his protection, and the grace he gave it with, who then of gracious speech many a jewel uttered, but of these not one that in my ear till morning hung. When, waking on my bed, my waking wit I questioned what the vision meant, it answered, this courtesy and favor of the Shah foreshadows the fair acceptance of thy verse, which lose no moment pushing to conclusion. This hearing, I addressed me like a pen to steady writing, for perchance, I thought, from the same fountain whence the vision grew, the interpretation also may come true. Breathless ran a simple rustic to a cunning man of dreams. Lo, this morning I was dreaming, and methought, in yon deserted village wandered, all about me shattered houses, and, behold, into one, methought, I went, and searched, and found a hoard of gold. Quoth the prophet in derision, O thou jewel of creation, go and sole your feet like horses, and returning to your village, stamp and scratch with hoof and nail, and give earth so sound a shaking, she must hand you something up. Went at once the unsuspecting countryman, with hearty purpose, Set to work as he was told. And, the very first encounter, struck upon his hoard of gold. Until thou hast thy purpose by the hilt. Catch at it boldly, or thou never wilt. 4. The story. A Shah there was who ruled the realm of Yun. And wore the ring of empire of Sikandar. And in his reign a sage, who had the tower of wisdom of so strong foundation built, that wise men from all quarters of the world, to catch the word of wisdom from his lip, went in a girdle round him. Which the Shah, observing, took him to his secrecy. Stirred not a step nor set design afoot, without that sage's sanction, till, so counselled, from Kaf to Kaf reached his dominion. No nation of the world or nation's chief, who wore the ring but under span of his, bowed down the neck. Then rising up in peace, under his justice grew, and knew no wrong. And in their strength was his dominion strong. The Shah that has not wisdom in himself, nor has a wise man for his counselor, the wand of his authority falls short, and his dominion crumbles at the base. For he, discerning not the characters of tyranny and justice, confounds both, making the world a desert, and the fount of justice a Sarab. Well was it said, better just Kafir than believing tyrant. God said to the prophet David, David, speak, and to the challenge, answer of the faith within thee. Even unbelieving princes, ill-reported if unworthy, yet, if they be just and righteous, were their worship of the fire, even these unto themselves reap glory and redress the world. 5. One night the Shah of Hunain, as his wont, considered of his power, and told his state, how great it was, and how about him sat the robe of honor of prosperity. Then found he nothing wanted to his heart, unless a son, who his dominion and glory might inherit after him. And then he turned him to the Shah, and said, O thou, whose wisdom is the rule of kings, glory to God who gave it. Answer me. Is any blessing better than a son? Man's prime desire, by which his name and he shall live beyond himself, by whom his eyes shine living, and his dust with roses blows. A foot for thee to stand on, he shall be. A hand to stop thy falling. In his youth thou shalt be young, and in his strength be strong. Sharp shall he be in battle as a sword, a cloud of arrows on the enemy's head. His voice shall cheer his friends to plight, and turn the foeman's glory into flight. Thus much of a good son, whose wholesome growth approves the root he grew from, but for one needed of evil, well, could one undo his generation, and as early pull hint and his vices from the string of time. Like Noah's, puffed with ignorance and pride, who felt the stab of, he is none of thine, and perished in the deluge. And because all are not good, be slow to pray for one, whom having you may have to pray to lose. Crazy for the curse of children, ran before the sheikh a fellow, crying out, O hear and help me. Pray to Allah for my clay, to raise me up a fresh young cypress, who my childless eyes may lighten with the beauty of his presence. Said the sheikh, be wise, and leave it wholly in the hand of Allah, who, whatever we are after, understands our business best. But the man persisted, saying, Sheikh, I languish in my longing. Help, and set my prayer a-going. Then the sheikh held up his hand, prayed, his arrow flew to heaven, from the hunting ground of darkness, down a musky fawn of China, brought, a boy, who, when the tender shoot of passion in him planted, found sufficient soil and sap, took to drinking with his fellows, from a corner of the housetop, ill affronts a neighbor's wife, Draws his dagger on the husband, who complains before the justice. And the father has to pay. Day and night the youngster's doings. Such, the talk of all the city. Nor entreaty, threat, or counsel held him, till the desperate father, once more to the sheikh running, catches at his garment, crying, "Sheikh, my only hope and helper. One more prayer. That God who laid will take that trouble from my head." But the sheikh replied, "Remember how that very day I warned you. Better not importune Allah, unto whom remains no other prayer, unless to pray for pardon. When from this world we are summoned on to bind the pack of travel, son or daughter ill shall help us. Slaves we are, and unencumbered. Best may do the master's mind. And, whatever he may order, do it with a will resigned." 6. When the sharp-witted sage had heard these sayings of the Shah, he said, "O Shah, who would not be the slave of lust, must still endure the sorrow of no son. Lust that makes blind the reason. Lust that makes a devil's self seem angel to our eyes. A cataract that, carrying havoc with it, confounds the prosperous house, a road of mire, where whoso falls he rises not again. A wine of which whoever tastes shall see redemption's face no more, one little sip of that delicious and unlawful drink, making crave much, and hanging round the palate, till it become a ring to lead thee by, putting the rope in a vain woman's hand, till thou thyself go down the way of nothing. For what is woman a foolish, faithless thing, to whom the wise self-subjected, himself, deep sinks beneath the folly he sets up. A very Kaffir in rapacity. Clothe her 100 years in gold and jewel. Her garment with brocade of Susa braided. Her very night gear wrought in cloth of gold. Dangle her ears with ruby and with pearl. Her house with golden vessels all ablaze. Her tables loaded with the fruit of kings. Ispahan apples, pomegranates of Yazd. And, be she thirsty, from a jeweled cup, drinking the water of the well of life. One little twist of temper, all you've done, goes all for nothing. Torment of my life. She cries, what have you ever done for me? Her brow's white tablet, yes, 'tis uninscribed with any letter of fidelity. Who ever read it there? Lo, in your bosom. She lies for years, you turn away a moment. And she forgets you, worse, if as you turn, her eye should light on any younger lover. Once upon the throne of judgment, telling one another secrets, sat Salaman and Balkis. The hearts of both were turned to truth, unsullied by deception. First the king of faith Salaman spoke, though mine the ring of empire. A never any day that passes darkens any one my doorway. But into his hand I look, and he who comes not empty-handed grows to honor in mine eyes. After this Balkis a secret from her hidden bosom uttered, saying, never night or morning comely youth before me passes, whom I look not longing after. Saying to myself, oh were he comforting of my sick soul. If this, as wise Ferdowsi says, the curse of better women, what should be the worse? 7. The sage his satire ended, and the Shah, with magic mighty wisdom his pure will, leaguing, its self-fulfillment wrought from heaven. And lo! From darkness came to light a child, of carnal composition unattaint. A rosebud blowing on the royal stem, a perfume from the realm of wisdom wafted. The crowning jewel of the crown, a star, under whose augury triumphed the throne, for whose auspicious name they clove the words Salamat, in calamity from evil, and Osman, the heathen from which he came. and hailed him by the title of Solomon. And whereas from no mother milk he drew, they chose for him a nurse, her name Absal. Her years not 20, from the silver line, dividing the musk harvest of her hair, down to her foot that trampled crowns of kings. A moon of beauty full, who thus elect Solomon of auspicious augury, should carry in the garment of her bounty, should feed him with the flowing of her breast. As soon as she had opened eyes on him, she closed those eyes to all the world beside. And her soul crazed, doting on her jewel in a golden cradle set, opening and shutting which her days delight, to gaze upon his heart flaming cheek, upon the darling whom, could she would have cradled as the baby of her eye. In rose and musk she washed him, to his lips pressed the pure sugar from the honeycomb. And when, day over, she withdrew her milk, she made, and having laid him in his bed, burned all night like a taper o'er his head. Then still as morning came, and as he grew, she dressed him like a little idol up. On with his robe, with fresh collyrium dew, touched his narcissus eyes, the musky locks, divided from his forehead, and embraced with gold and ruby girdle his fine waist. So reared she him till full 14 his years. 14 day full the beauty of his face, that rode high in 100,000 hearts. Yea, when Solomon was but half lance high, lance-like he struck a wound in every one, and burned and shook down splendor like a sun. 8. Soon as the lord of Heaven had sprung his horse over the horizon into the blue field, Solomon rose drunk with the wine of sleep, and set himself a stirrup for the field. He and a troop of princes, kings in blood, kings too in the kingdom troubling tribe of beauty, all young in years and courage, bat in hand, galloped a field, tossed down the golden ball, and chased so many crescent moons a full, and, all alike intent upon the game, Solomon still would carry from them all the prize, and shouting, how, drive home the ball. This done, Solomon bent him as a bow to shooting, from the marksman of the world, called for an unstrung bow, himself the cord fitted unhelped, and nimbly with his hand twanging made cry, and drew it to his ear. Then, fixing the 3-feathered fowl, discharged. No point in heaven's azure but his arrow hit, nay, but heaven were made of adamant, would overtake the horizon as it rolled. And, whether aiming at the fawn a foot, or bird on wing, his arrow went away straight, like the soul that cannot go astray. When night came, that releases man from toil, he played the chess of social intercourse, prepared his banquet hall like paradise, summoned his hoary-faced musicians, and, when his brain grew warm with wine, the veil flung off him of reserve. Now lip to lip, concerting with the singer he would breathe, like a Mesha's life into the dead. Now made of the melodious moving pipe, a sugar cane between his lips that ran men's ears with sweetness, taking up a harp between its dry string and his finger fresh struck fire, or lifting in his arms a lute, as if a little child for chastisement, pinching its ear such cries of sorrow wrung, as drew blood to the eyes of older men. Now sang he like the nightingale alone, now set together voice and instrument, and thus with his associates night he spent. His soul rejoiced in knowledge of all kinds. The fine edge of his wit would split a hair, and in the noose of apprehension catch a meaning ere articulate in word. His verse was like the Pleiads, his discourse the mourners of the bier, his penmanship tablet and running reed his worshippers. Fine on the lip of youth as the first hair, drove penmen, as that lovers, to despair. His bounty was as oceans, nay, the seas. self but the foam of his munificence. For it threw up the shell, but he the pearl. He was a cloud that rained upon the world. Direms for drops. The banquet of whose bounty left Hadams churlish in comparison. 9. Suddenly that sweet minister of mine rebuked me angrily. What folly, Jámi! Wearing that indefatigable pen in celebration of an alien Shah, whose throne, not grounded in the eternal world, yesterday was, today is not. I answered. O fount of light! Under an alien name. One shadow one upon whose head the crown. Both was and is today, to whose firman the 7 kingdoms of the world are subject. And the seas 7 but droppings of his largesse. Good luck to him who under other name taught us to veil the praises of a power to which the initiate scarce find open door. Sat a lover solitary, self-discoursing in a corner, passionate and ever-changing, invocation pouring out, sometimes sun and moon, and sometimes under hyacinth half-hidden roses, or the lofty cypress, and the little weed below, nightingaling thus a noodle, heard him, and, completely puzzled. What? Quoth he, and you, a lover, raving not about your mistress, but about the moon and roses. Answered he, O thou that aimest wide of love, and lover's language, wholly misinterpreting. Sun and moon are but my lady's self, as any lover knows. Hyacinth I said, and meant her. A hair, her cheek was in the rose. And I myself the wretched weed that in her cypress shadow grows. 10. Now was Salaman in his prime of growth, his cypress stature risen to high top, and the new blooming garden of his beauty began to bear, and Absal longed to gather. But the fruit grew upon too high a bough, to which the noose of her desire was short. She too rejoiced in beauty of her own. No wit behind Salaman, whom she now began enticing with her sorcery. Now from her hair would twine a musky chain, to bind his heart, now twisted into curls, nestling innumerable temptations, doubled the darkness of her eyes with surma, to make him lose his way, and over them adorned the bows that were to shoot him then. Now to the rose leaf of her cheek would add fresh rose, and then a grain of musk lay there, the bird of the beloved heart to snare. Now with a laugh would break the ruby seal, that locked up pearl, or busied in the room, would smite her hand perhaps, on that pretence, to lift and show the silver in her sleeve, or hastily rising clash her golden anklets, to draw the crowned head under her feet. Thus by innumerable bridal wiles she went about soliciting his eyes, which she would scarce let lose her for a moment. For well she knew that mainly by the eye love makes his sign, and by no other road enters and takes possession of the heart. Burning with desire Zuleika built a chamber, wall and ceiling, blank as an untarnished mirror, spotless as the heart of Yusuf. Then she made a cunning painter multiply her image round it. Not an inch of wall but echoed with the reflex of her beauty. Then amid them all in all her glory sat she down, and sent for Yusuf. She began a tale of love, and lifted up her veil. From her look he turned, but turning wheresoever, ever saw her looking at him still. Then desire arose within him. He was almost yielding, almost laying honey on her lip, when a signal out of darkness spoke to him, and he withdrew his hand, and dropped the skirt of fortune. 11. Thus day by day did Absal tempt Salaman, and by her wiles began to work. Her eyes Narcissus stole his sleep, their lashes Pierced to his heart, out from her locks a snake. Bit him, and bitter, bitter on his tongue. Became the memory of her honey lip. He saw the ringlet restless on her cheek. And he too quivered with desire. His tears turned crimson from her cheek, whose musky spot infected all his soul with melancholy. Love drew him from behind the veil, where yet withheld him better resolution. Oh, should the food I longed for, tasted, turn unwholesome, and if all my life to come should sicken from one momentary sweet. On the seashore sat a raven, blind, and from the bitter cistern forked his only drink to draw. Suddenly the pelican, flying over fortune's shadow, cast upon his head, and calling, "Come, poor son of salt, and taste of sweet, sweet water from my maw." Said the raven, "If I taste it once, the salt I have to live on may forever turn to loathing. And I sit a bird accursed upon the shore to die of thirst." 12. Now when Solomon's heart turned to Absal, her star was happy in the heavens, old love put forth afresh, desire doubled his bond. And of the running time she watched an hour to creep into the mansion of her moon, and satiate her soul upon his lips. And the hour came, she stole into his chamber, ran up to him, life's offer in her hand. And, falling like a shadow at his feet, she laid her face beneath. Salaman then, with all the courtesies of princely grace, put forth his hand, he raised her in his arms. He held her trembling there, and from that fount drew first desire, then deeper from her lips. That, yielding, mutually drew from his a wine that ever drawn from never failed. So through the day, so through another still. The day became a seventh, the seventh a moon. The moon a year, while they rejoiced together, thinking their pleasure never was to end. But rolling heaven whispered from his ambush, "So in my license is it not set down? Ah, for the sweet societies I make at morning and before the nightfall break. Ah, for the bliss that with the setting sun I mix, and, with his rising, all is done." Into Baghdad came a hungry Arab, after many days of waiting. Into the Khalifa's supper pushed, and got before a pasty, luscious as the lip of beauty, or the tongue of eloquence. Soon as seen, indecent hunger seizes up and swallows down. Then his mouth undaunted wiping, "O Khalifa, hear me swear, not of any other pasty than of thine to sup or dine." The Khalifa laughed and answered, "Fool! Who thinkest to determine what is in the hands of fate? Take and thrust him from the gate." 13. While a full year was counted by the moon, Salaman and Absal rejoiced together. And for so long he stood not in the face of sage or shah, and their bereaved hearts were torn in twain with the desire of him. They questioned those about him, and from them heard something, then himself in presence summoned. And, subtly sifting on all sides, so plied interrogation till it hit the mark, and all the truth was told. Then sage and shah struck out with hand and foot in his redress. And first with reason, which is also best. Reason that rights the retrograde, completes the imperfect, reason that unties the knot. For reason is the fountain from of old, from which the prophets drew, and none beside who boasts of other inspiration lies. There are no other prophets than the wise. 14. First spoke the Shah. "Salaman, O my soul! O taper of the banquet of my house! Light of the eyes of my prosperity! And making bloom the court of hope with rose. Year's rosebud like my own blood I devoured, till in my hand I carried thee, my rose. Oh, do not tear my garment from my hand. Nor wound thy father with a dagger thorn. Years for thy sake the crown has worn my brow. And years my foot been growing to the throne. Only for thee, O spurn them not with thine. O turn thy face from dalliance unwise. Lay not thy heart's hand on a minion. For what thy proper pastime? Is it not? To mount and manage Raksh along the field. Not, with no stouter weapon than a lovelock. Idly reclining on a silver breast. Go, fly thine arrow at the antelope. And lion, let not me my lion see. Slain by the arrow eyes of a gazelle. Go, flash thy steel among the ranks of men. And smite the warriors' necks, not, flying them. Lay down thine own beneath a woman's foot. Leave off such doing in the name of God. Nor bring thy father weeping to the ground. Years have I held myself aloft, and all. For thee, O shame if thou prepare my fall. When before Shiroea's feet, drenched in blood fell Kai Khusro. He declared this parable. Wretch, there was a branch that, waxing wanton o'er the root he drank from. At a draught the living water, drained wherewith himself to crown. Died the root, and with it died the branch, and barren was brought down. 15. Salaman heard, the sea of his soul was moved. And bubbled up with jewels, and he said, O Shah, I am the slave of thy desire. Dust of thy throne ascending foot am I. Whatever thou desirest I would do. But sicken of my own incompetence. Not in the hand of my infirmer will. To carry into deed mine own desire. Time upon time I torture mine own soul. Devising liberation from the snare. I languish in. But when upon that moon I think, my soul relapses, and when look I leave both worlds behind to follow her. 16. The Shah ceased counsel, and the sage began. O thou new vintage of a garden old! Last blazon of the pen of Let There Be! Who readst the 7 and 4? Interpretest the writing on the leaves of night and day. Archetype of the assembly of the world. Who holds the key of Adam's treasury. Know thine own dignity and slight it not. For thou art greater yet than all I tell. The mighty hand that mixed thy dust inscribed. The character of wisdom on thy heart. O cleanse thy bosom of material form. And turn the mirror of the soul to spirit. Until it be with spirit all possiest. Drowned in the light of intellectual truth. O veil thine eyes from mortal paramour. And follow not her step. For what is she? What is she but a vice and a reproach? Her very garment hem pollution. For such pollution madden not thine eyes. Waste not thy body's strength, nor taint thy soul. Nor set the body and the soul in strife. Supreme is thine original degree. Thy star upon the top of heaven, but lust will fling it down even unto the dust. Quoth a muezzin unto crested Chanticleer, O voice of morning! Not a sage of all the sages prophesies of dawn, or startles at the wing of time, like thee. One so wise methinks were fitter, perching on the beams of heaven, than with these poor hens about him, raking in a heap of dung. And, replied the cock, in heaven once I was, but by my evil lust am fallen down to raking, with my wretched hens about me, on the dunghill. Otherwise I were even now in Eden, with the bird of paradise. 17. When from the sage these words Salaman heard, the breath of wisdom round his palate blew. He said, O darling of the soul of Plato, to whom 100 Aristotles bow. O thou that an 11th to the 10 original intelligences addest. I lay my face before thee in the dust. The humblest scholar of thy court am I, whose every word I find a well of wisdom, and hasten to imbibe it in my soul. But clear unto thy clearest eye it is. That choice is not within oneself, to do. Not in the will, but in the power, to do. From that which I originally am. How shall I swerve? Or how put forth a sign? Beyond the power that is by nature mine. 18. Unto the soul that is confused by love comes sorrow after sorrow, most of all. To love whose only friendship is reproof. And overmuch of counsel, whereby love grows stubborn, and increases the disease. Love unreproved is a delicious food. Reproved, is feeding on one's own heart's blood. Salaman heard, his soul came to his lips. Reproaches struck not Absal out of him, but drove confusion in. Bitter became the drinking of the sweet draught of delight, and wan the splendor of his moon of beauty. His breath was indignation, and his heart bled from the arrow, and his anguish grew. How bear it? Able to endure one wound. From wound on wound no remedy but flight. Day after day, design upon design. He turned the matter over in his heart. And, after all, no remedy but flight. Resolved on that, he victualled and equipped a camel, and one night he led it forth. And mounted, he and Absal at his side. The fair Salaman and Absal the fair. Together on one camel side by side. Twin kernels in a single almond packed. And true love murmurs not, however small. His chamber, nay, the straightest best of all. When the moon of Canaan Yusuf darkened in the prison of Egypt. Night by night Zuleika went to see him, for her heart was broken. Then to her said one who never yet had tasted of love's garden. Leavest thou thy palace chamber for the felon's narrow cell? Answered she, without my lover were my chamber heaven's horizon. It were closer than an ant's eye. And the ant's eye wider were than heaven, my lover with me there. 19. 6 days Salaman on the camel rode. And then remembrance of foregone reproach abode not by him. And upon the 7th he halted on the seashore, and beheld an ocean boundless as the heaven above, that, reaching its circumference from Kaf to Kaf, down to the back of Gao and Mani, descended, and its stars were creatures' eyes. The face of it was as it were a range of moving mountains, or as endless hosts of camels trooping from all quarters up, furious, with the foam upon their lips. In it innumerable glittering fish, like jewels polished sharp, to the sharp eye, but for an instant visible, glancing through, as silver scissors slice a blue brocade. Though were the dragon from its hollow roused, the dragon of the stars would stare aghast. Salaman eyed the sea, and cast about to cross it, and forthwith upon the shore devised a shallop like a crescent moon, wherein that sun and moon in happy hour entered as into some celestial sign, that, figured like a bow, but arrow-like in flight, was feathered with a little sail, and, pitched upon the water like a duck. So with her bosom sped to her desire, when they had sailed their vessel for a moon, and marred their beauty with the wind. Othc. Suddenly in mid-sea revealed itself an isle, beyond description beautiful. An isle that all was garden. Not a bird of note or plume in all the world but there. There as in bridal retinue arrayed. The pheasant in his crown, the dove in her collar. And those who tuned their bills among the trees. That arm in arm from fingers paralysed. With any breath of air fruit moist and dry. Down scattered in profusion to their feet. Where fountains of sweet water ran. And round. Sunshine and shadow checker-chased the ground. Here Iram garden seemed in secrecy, blowing the rosebud of its revelation. Or paradise, forgetful of the day. Of audit, lifted from her face the veil. Salaman saw the isle, and thought no more of further. There with Absal, he sat down. Absal and he together side by side, rejoicing like the lily and the rose, together like the body and the soul, under its trees in one another's arms. They slept, they drank its fountains hand in hand, sought sugar with the parrot, or in sport paraded with the peacock, raced the partridge, or fell a talking with the nightingale. There was the rose without a thorn, and there the treasure and no serpent to beware. What sweeter than your mistress at your side, in such a solitude, and none to chide? Whispered one to Wamak, O thou victim of the wound of Uzra, what is it that like a shadow movest thou about in silence, meditating night and day? Wamak answered, even this, to fly with Uzra to the desert, there by so remote a fountain, that, whichever way one travelled, league on league, one yet should never meet the face of man. There to pitch my tent, for ever. There to gaze on my beloved. Gaze, till gazing out of gazing grew to being her I gaze on. She and I no more, but in one undivided being blended. All that is not one must ever suffer with the wound of absence. And whoever in love's city enters, finds but room for one, and but in oneness union. 20. When by and by the Shah was made aware of that soul-wasting absence of his son, he reached a cry to heave en, his eyelashes wept blood, search everywhere he set a foot, but none could tell the hidden mystery. Then bade he bring a mirror that he had, a mirror, like the bosom of the wise, reflecting all the world, and lifting up the veil from all its secret, good and evil. That mirror bade he bring, and, in its face looking, beheld the face of his desire. He saw those lovers in the solitude turn from the world, and all its ways, and people, and looking only in each other's eyes, and never finding any sorrow there. The Shah beheld them as they were, and pity fell on his eyes, and he reproached them not. And, gathering all their life into his hand, not a thread lost, disposed in order all. Oh, for the noble nature, and clear heart, that, seeing two who draw one breath, together, drinking the cup of happiness and tears, unshattered by the stone of separation, is loath their sweet communion to destroy, or cast a tangle in the skein of joy. The arrows that assail the lords of sorrow come from the hand of retribution. Do well, that in thy turn well may betide thee, and turn from ill, that ill may turn beside thee. Farhad, moulder of the mountain, love distracted looked to Shiren, and Shiren the sculptor's passion saw, and turned her heart to him. Then the fire of jealous frenzy caught and carried up the harvest of the might of Kai Khusro, plotting with that ancient hag of fate. The sculptor's cup he poisoned, and remained the lord of love. So, but fate that fate avenges, arms shear away with the dagger, that at once from Shiren tore him, hurled him from the throne of glory. 21. But as the days went on, and still the Shah beheld Salaman how sunk in Absal, and yet no hand of better effort lifted, but still the crown that shall adorn his head, and still the throne that waited for his foot, trampled from memory by a base desire, of which the soul was still unsatisfied. Then from the sorrow of the Shah fell fire, to gracelessness ungracious he became, and, quite to shatter his rebellious lust, upon Salaman all his will discharged. And lo! Salaman to his mistress turned, but could not reach her, looked and looked again, and palpitated toward her, but in vain. O misery! What to the bankrupt worse than gold he cannot reach, to one athirst Than fountain to the eye and lip forbid. Or than heaven open to the eyes in hell. Yet, when Solomon's anguish was extreme, the door of mercy opened in his face. He saw and knew his father's hand outstretched to lift him from perdition, timidly. Timidly toward his father's face his own. He lifted, pardon pleading, crime contest. As the stray bird one day will find her nest. A disciple asked a master, by what token should a father vouch for his reputed son? Said the master, by the stripling, howsoever late or early, like to the reputed father, growing, whether wise or foolish. Lo, the disregarded darnel with itself adorns the wheat field, and for all the early season satisfies the farmer's eye. But come once the hour of harvest, and another grain shall answer. Darnel and no wheat, am I. 22. When the Shah saw Solomon's face again, and breathed the breath of reconciliation, he laid the hand of love upon his shoulder, the kiss of welcome on his cheek, and said, O thou, who lost, love's banquet lost its salt, and mankind's eye its pupil, thy return is as another sun to heaven, a new rose blooming in the garden of the soul. Arise, O moon of majesty unwaned. The court of the horizon is thy court. Thy kingdom is the kingdom of the world. Lo! Throne and crown await thee, throne and crown. Without thy impress but uncurrent gold. Not to be stamped by one not worthy them. Behold! The rebel's face is at thy door. Let him not triumph, let the wicked dread. The throne under thy feet, the crown upon thy head. O spurn them not behind thee. O my son! Wipe thou the woman's henna from thy hand. Withdraw thee from the minion who from thee dominion draws. The time is come to choose thy mistress or the world to hold or lose. For are the signs of kingly aptitude. Wise head, clean heart, strong arm, and open hand. Wise is he not, continent cannot be, who binds himself to an unworthy lust. Nor valiant, who submits to a weak woman. Nor liberal, who cannot draw his hand from that in which so basely he is busied. And of these four who misses all or one is not the bridegroom of dominion. 23. Ah, the poor lover! In the changing hands of day and night no wretcheder than he. No arrow from the bow of evil fate but reaches him, one dagger at his throat. Another comes to wound him from behind. Wounded by love, then wounded by reproof of loving, and, scarce staunched the blood of shame. By flying from his love, then, worst of all, love's back blow of revenge for having fled. Solomon heard, he rent the robe of peace. He came to loathe his life, and long for death. For better death itself than life in death. He turned his face with Absal to the desert. Entered the deadly plain. Branch upon branch. Cut down, and gathered in a lofty pile. And fired. They looked upon the flames, those two. They looked, and they rejoiced, and hand in hand they sprang into the fire. The Shah who saw in secret all had ordered. And the flame, directed by his self-fulfilling will, devouring utterly Absal, passed by. Solomon harmless, the pure gold returned. Entire, but all the baser metal burned. 24. Heaven's dome is but a wondrous house of sorrow, and happiness therein a lying fable. When first they mixed the clay of man, and clothed his spirit in the robe of perfect beauty. For 40 mornings did an evil cloud rain sorrows over him from head to foot. And when the 40 mornings passed to night, then came one morning shower of joy, to 40 of the rain of sorrow. And though the better fortune came at last, To seal the work, yet every wise man knows. Such consummation never can be here. Salaman fired the pile. And in the flame that, passing him, consumed Absal like straw, died his divided self, and there survived his individual, and, like a body, from which the soul is parted, all alone. Then rose his cry to heaven, his eyelashes dropped blood, his sighs stood like a smoke in heaven. And mourning rent her garment at his anguish. He tore his bosom with his nails, he smote stone on his bosom, looking then on hands no longer locked in hers, and lost their jewel. He tore them with his teeth. And when came night, he hid him in some corner of the house, and communed with the phantom of his love. O thou whose presence so long soothed my soul, now burnt with thy remembrance. O so long. The light that fed these eyes now dark with tears. O long, long home of love now lost forever. We were together, that was all enough. We two rejoicing in each other's eyes. Infinitely rejoicing, all the world. Nothing to us, nor we to all the world. No road to reach us, nor an eye to watch. All day we whispered in each other's ears. All night we slept in one another's arms. All seemed to our desire, as if the hand of unjust fortune were for once too short. O would to God that when I lit the pyre, the flame had left thee living and me dead. Not living worse than dead, deprived of thee. O were I but with thee, at any cost. Stripped of this terrible self-solitude. O but with the annihilation, lost. Or in eternal intercourse renewed. Slumber drunk an Arab in the desert off his camel tumbled. Who the lighter of her burden ran upon her road rejoicing. When the Arab woke at morning, rubbed his eyes and looked about him. O my camel! O my camel! Quoth he, camel of my soul. That lost with her I lost might be. Or found, she might be found with me. 25. When in this plight the Shah Salaman saw, his soul was struck with anguish, and the vein of life within was strangled, what to do he knew not. Then he turned him to the sage. O altar of the world, to whom mankind directs the face of prayer in weal or woe. Nothing but wisdom can untie the knot. And art not thou the wisdom of the world, the master key of all its difficulties? Absal is perished, and, because of her, Salaman dedicates his life to sorrow. I cannot bring back her, nor comfort him. Lo, I have said, my sorrow is before thee. From thy far-reaching wisdom help thou me. Fast in the hand of sorrow, help thou me. For I am very wretched. Then the sage. O thou that errest not from the road of right. If but Salaman have not broke my bond, nor lies beyond the noose of my firman, he quickly shall unload his heart to me, and I will find a remedy for all. 26. Then the sage counseled, and Salaman heard, and drew the wisdom down into his heart. And, sitting in the shadow of the perfect, his soul found quiet under. Sweet it seemed, sweeping the chaff and litter from his own, to be the very dust of wisdom's door. Slave of the firman of the Lord of life. Then the sage marveled at his towardness, and wrought in miracle in his behalf. He poured the wine of wisdom in his cup. He laid the dew of peace upon his lips. And when old love returned to memory, and broke in passion from his lips, the sage, under whose waxing will existence rose, responsive, and, relaxing, waned again, raising a phantom image of Absal, set it awhile before Salaman's eyes, till, having sowed the seed of quiet there, it went again down to annihilation. But ever, for the sum of his discourse, the sage would tell of a celestial love. Zura, he said, the luster of the stars. For whom the beauty of the brightest wanes? Who were she to reveal her perfect beauty? The sun and moon would craze. Zura, he said. The sweetness of the banquet, none in song. Like her, her harp filling the ear of heaven. That dervish dances at her harmony. Salaman listened, and inclined, again. Repeated, inclination ever grew. Until the sage beholding in his soul the spirit quicken, so effectually. With Zura wrought, that she revealed herself in her pure beauty to Salaman's soul. And washing Absal's image from his breast, there reigned instead celestial beauty seen. He left the earthly, and, once come to know eternal love, he let the mortal go. 27. The crown of empire how supreme a lot. The throne of the Sultan how high. But not for all, none but the heavenward foot may dare to mount, the head that touches heaven to wear. When the beloved of royal augury was rescued from the bondage of Absal, then he arose, and shaking off the dust of that lost travel, girded up his heart, and looked with undefiled robe to heaven. Then was his head worthy to wear the crown, his foot to mount the throne. And then the Shah summoned the chiefs of cities and of states, summoned the absolute ones who wore the ring, and such a banquet ordered as is not for sovereign assemblement the like. In the folding of the records of the world, no armed host, nor captain of a host, from all the quarters of the world, but there, of whom not one but to Salaman did obeisance, and lifted up his neck to yoke it under his supremacy. Then the Shah crowned him with the golden crown, and set the golden throne beneath his feet, and over all the heads of the assembly, and in the ears of all of them, his jewels, with the diamond of wisdom cut, and said, 28. My son, the kingdom of the world is not eternal, nor the sum of right desire. Make thou the faith-preserving intellect thy counselor, and considering today tomorrow's seed field, ere that come to bear. So with the harvest of eternity, all work with wisdom hath to do, by that stamped current only. What thyself to do. Art wise, that do, what not, consult the wise. Turn not thy face away from the old ways, that were the canon of the kings of old. Nor cloud with tyranny the glass of justice, but rather strive that all confusion change by thy justice to its opposite. In whatsoever thou shalt take or give, look to the how, giving and taking still, not by the backward counsel of the godless, but by the law of faith increase and give. Drain not thy people's purse, the tyranny which thee enriches at thy subjects' cost. A while shall make thee strong, but in the end shall bow thy neck beneath a double burden. The tyrant goes to hell, follow not him. Become not thou the fuel of its fires. Thou art a shepherd, and thy flock the people. To save and not destroy, nor at their loss. To lift thyself above the shepherd's calling. For which is for the other, flock or shepherd? And join with thee true men to keep the flock. Dogs, if you will, but trusty, head in leash. Whose teeth are for the wolf, not for the lamb. And least of all the wolf's accomplices. Their jaws blood dripping from the tyrant's shambles. For shahs must have desires, but be they wise. And trusty, knowing well the realm's estate. For who eats profit of a fool? And least a wise king girdled by a foolish counsel. Knowing how far to Shah and subject bound. On either hand, not by extortion, nor usury wrung from the people's purse. Their masters and their own estates, to whom enough is apt enough to make them rebel. Feeding to such a surplus as feeds hell. Proper in soul and body be they, pitiful to poverty, hospitable to the saint. Their sweet access a salve to wounded hearts. Their vengeance terrible to the evil doer. Thy heralds through the country bringing thee report of good or ill, which to confirm. By thy peculiar eye, and least of all, suffering accuser also to be judge. By surest steps builds up prosperity. 29. Epilogue. Under the outward form of any story, an inner meaning lies. This story now completed, do thou of its mystery, whereto the wise hath found himself a way. Have thy desire, no tale of I and thou, though I and thou be its interpreters. What signifies the Shah? And what the sage? And what Salaman not of woman born? And what Absal who drew him to desire? And what the kingdom that awaited him, when he had drawn his garment from her hand? What means that fiery pile? And what the sea? And what that heavenly Zura who at last cleared Absal from the mirror of his soul? Learn part by part the mystery from me. All ear from head to foot and understanding be. 30. The incomparable Creator, when this world he did create, created first of all. The first intelligence, first of a chain of 10 intelligences, of which the last sole agent is in this our universe. Active intelligence so called. The one distributor of evil and of good, of joy and sorrow, himself apart from matter. In essence and in energy, his treasure. Subject to no such talisman, he yet hath fashioned all that is, material form and spiritual, sprung from him, by him, directed all, and in his bounty drowned. Therefore is he that firm issuing Shah, to whom the world was subject. But because what he distributes to the universe, himself from still a higher power receives. The wise, and all who comprehend aright, will recognize that higher in the sage. His the prime spirit that, spontaneously projected by the 10th intelligence, was from no womb of matter reproduced. A special essence called the soul, a child, fresh sprung from heaven in raiment undefiled, of sensual taint, and therefore called Salaman. And who Absal, the lust-adoring body, slave to the blood and sense, through whom the soul, although the body's very life it be, does yet imbibe the knowledge and desire of things of sense. And these united thus, by such a tie God only can unloose. Body and soul are lovers each of other. What is the sea on which they sailed? The sea of animal desire, the sensual abyss, under whose waters lie a world of being, swept far from God in that submersion. And wherefore was it Iwa in that isle, deceived in her delight, and that Salaman fell short of his desire? That was to show how passion tires, and how with time begins the folding of the carpet of desire, and what the turning of Solomon's heart back to the Shah, and looking to the throne of pomp and glory. What but the return of the lost soul to its true parentage, and back from carnal error looking up, repentant to its intellectual throne? What is the fire? Ascetic discipline that burns away the animal alloy, till all the dross of matter be consumed, and the essential soul, its raiment clean of mortal taint, be left. But forasmuch as any lifelong habit so consumed may well recur a pang for what is lost, therefore the sage set in Solomon's eyes a soothing phantom of the past, but still told of a better Venus, till his soul she filled, and blotted out his mortal love. For what is Zura, that divine perfection, wherewith the soul inspurred and all arrayed in intellectual light is royal blessed, and mounts the throne, and wears the crown, and reigns Lord of the empire of humanity? This is the meaning of this mystery. which to know wholly ponder in thy heart, till all its ancient secret be enlarged. Enough, the written summary I close, and set my seal. The truth God only knows. Appendix. What follows concerning the royal game of Chuggin comes from the Appendix to Volume 1 of Sir William Ouseley's Travels in the East. Firdusi tells of Siyavesh and his Iranian, Persian, heroes astonishing Afrasiab of Turan with their skill at this game 600 years before Christ, and Gushtasp, Histasps, to the sound of drum and trumpet, drives the ball invisible with his blow. Nizami sets Shiren and her maidens playing at it, against her king, Khusro Perviz, and his ministers. On one side was the moon and her stars. On the other the Shah and his firman-bearers. Ouseley, however, allowing for poetic license, believes the game was played through almost every reign of the Sasanian dynasty, as much esteemed by the Mohammedan kings as by their fire-worshipping predecessors. We find the Greek emperor, Manuel Comnenus, with his Byzantine princes and nobles, enjoying this amusement on horseback in the 12th century, the wooden ball having been exchanged for one more soft, formed of stuff, leather. And the stick, or wand, instead of a hammer-like head, terminating in a hoop, which, as are battledores or tennis rackets, presented to the ball a reticulated space. This imperial sport is well described by the historian Cinemas, who probably was a spectator. It went by the slightly altered name Sukanisterian, which word, however, since Chuggin means the bandy stick employed, more properly signifies, I suppose, the ground played on. And equally related to the Persian, had they chosen to affix, as so often, the verb common to themselves, the Greeks, the Latins, and us, and called the place of exercise Shuganistan, or Chuggin stand. Pietro della Valle, who saw it played in Shah Abbas' time, 1618, calls it Palomalio, and found both game and name subsisting in the Florentine, Calcio, only that the Florentine played a foot, and the Persian, Pu nobilment a cavallo. The Spanish Jesuit Ovalle found it also on foot, under the name of Chueca, in South America, in 1646. Ducange finds name and game also in the chicane of Languedoc, from which he naturally thinks it borrowed. Not daring to push derivation to the English word chicken, he says, ca signify unpulit, en sort que, chiquaner, seroit imiter les pulits ca ont coutum de courir les uns après les autres pour arracher les morceaux du bec, etc. Englishmen know the game well, on foot too, and with such leather balls as the Persians perhaps knew not how to harden, under many forms and names, golf, stowball, shinty, hockey, bandy, etc. And now with regard to the frontispiece. It is accurately copied from an engraving in Sir William's book, which he says, and as those who care to look into the Bodleian for it may see, is accurately copied from a very beautiful Persian MS. Containing the works of Hafiz, transcribed in the year 956 of the Hijra, 1549 of Christ, the MS is in my own collection. This delineation exhibits the horsemen contending for the ball, their short jackets seem peculiarly adapted to the sport. We see the mill, or goals, servants attend on foot holding chuggins in readiness for other persons who may join in the amusement, or to supply the place of any that may be broken. A young prince, as his par, or feather, would indicate, receives on his entrance into the maidan, or place of exercise, a chuggin from the hands of a bearded man very plainly dressed. Yet, as an intelligent painter at Ispahan assured me, and as appears from other miniatures in the same book, this bearded figure is meant to represent Hafiz himself, etc. The Persian legend at the top corner is the verse from Hafiz which the drawing illustrates. Shasuvara kush b'maiden amdi guei bezin. Though the sticks, or bats, are here represented long, they really were, as Chardin and others report, so short as to cause the rider to stoop below the saddlebow to strike, which, the horse going full gallop, was great part of the difficulty. And Tabri describes events in the 8th century, just before his own time, when Harun al-Rashid was still little, so that when on horseback, he could not reach to strike the ball with a chuggin. Ouseley also, judging from the illustration, in which Persian artists are not very accurate, thinks the chuggin sticks were only generally, or partially semicircular at the striking end. But that they were so, varying perhaps a little in degree as our bandy sticks do, is proved by the text of the present poem, as also by a previous line in the original, where the realm of existence is the space of his maidan, the ball of heaven in the crook of his chuggin. And passages in Hafiz speak of his heart as being carried off by his beloved's eyebrow, which no Persian lover ever dreamt of but as arched indeed. As the fair one of Persian mysticism is the deity's self, so the points of that beauty, as in our canticles, adumbrate so many of the deity's attributes, varying however with various poets or their commentators. Sir W. Jones speaks of the hair as emblematic of the expansion of divine glory, the lips as of hidden mysteries, the down of the cheek as spirits round the throne, whose central point of excessive light is darkened into the mole upon the cheek. Though Luck, from a Turkish commentary, interprets the ringlets as the divine mysteries, the forehead their manifestation, etc. The beauty of Absal, though sensual, yet seduces Salaman, the soul, with its likeness to the divine. And her tresses, as we see, play their part, involving him in their intricacies. The following ode of Jami's on the subject very happily entangles the ear with its repetitions of that mysterious Zulf which closes the first two, and every alternate line, to the end. Le texte de cette ode, says de Sacy, est d'une charme inexprimable que l'on chercherait inutilement dans une traduction. The Persian therefore is here vocalized as nearly as possible in English notes, to give the reader a notion of the harmony which is its chief merit. But I subjoin for the lover of literal translation a very literal one, which he can if he chooses place word for word under the Persian, and, if he will accept a very little help at starting, may construe into what form he pleases, supplying for himself a verb and a point where the reader of the original has to do so. The apostrophized I, here written, but in Persian only pronounced, either denotes that the following noun, pronoun, or adjective belongs to it as genitive or epithet, as in the first line, Dil I man equals, heart of I, me. Or acts merely as a passing note of harmony, with a people who hate all harshness but indeed, between any two consonants and a third, or between any consonant long vowel and a succeeding consonant, unless that long vowel's consonant be n. Tamam I Zulf in line 3 is an instance of the I in its latter use. In both cases it is common in quantity. The ra in the fifth and last lines mark the dative. I dil I man said I dam I Zulfaitu. Dam I dilha gashta nam I Zulfaitu. Banda shadar Zulfi to dilha tamam. Dam you band amad tamam I Zulfaitu. Dad I tashrif I gulam I bandara. Zulfi to I man gulam I Zulfaitu. Lake I ruksar I gulrang I to nist. Juz nikab f mushkifam I Zulfaitu. Ram kanand az dam I mergan way ajab. Jan I be aram I ram I Zulf I to. Zulfi to bala I madarad makam. Bas buland amad makam I Zulfaitu. Sub I ikbal asti tali har nafas. Bonda Jami raz shem I Zulfaitu. Ah heart I pray snare ringlet you. Snare hearts become name ringlet you. Bound are in ringlet you hearts holy. Snare and bond become holy ringlet you. Give honor slave bound. Ringlet you ah I slave ringlet you. Worthy cheek rose colored you not is. Except veil musky natured ringlet you. Escape make from snare birds ah strange. Soul without peace obsequious of ringlet you. Ringlet you above moon has place. Very high is place ringlet you. Dawn bliss is revealed every breath. Bondman Jami from night. Ringlet you. Notes. Page 1. Layla, Majnun. All well-known types of Eastern lovers. Shirin and her suitors figure in Secretary XX. Page 1. To cousin the world. The Persian mystics also represent the deity Daisanji with human destiny behind the curtain. Page 2. Censor. The Apollonius of Keats' Lamia. Page 2. No room for two. This Sufi identification with deity, further illustrated in the story of sect. 19, is shadowed in a parable of Jalaladdin, of which here is an outline. One knocked at the beloved's door, and a voice asked from within, "Who is there?" And he answered, "It is I." Then the voice said, "This house will not hold me and thee." And the door was not opened. Then went the lover into the desert, and fasted and prayed in solitude. And after a year he returned, and knocked again at the door. And again the voice asked, "Who is there?" And he said, "It is thyself," and the door was opened to him. Page 3. The poet's name. The name, Jami, also signifying, a cup. The poets Yusuf and Zuleika opens also with this divine wine, the favorite symbol of Hafiz and other Persian mystics. The tavern spoken of is the world. I listen in the tavern of sweet songs, and catch no echo of their harmony. The guests have drunk the wine and are departed, leaving their empty bowls behind, not one to carry on the revel cup in hand. Up Jami then, and whether lees or wine, to offer, boldly offer it in thine. Page 4. Old stories. Yusuf and Zuleika, Layla and Majnun, etc. Page 4. Glasses turned to 4. First notice of spectacles in Oriental poetry, perhaps. Page 4. The master, whose verse is quoted, is Jalaladdin, the great Sufi teacher. The king himself is Yaqub Beg, whose father's vision appears in the next section. Page 7. Shahsman. Lord of the world, sovereign, Hassan, beautiful, good. Hassan Beg of Western Persia, famous for his beauty, had helped Jami with escort in a dangerous pilgrimage. He died, as history and a previous line in the original tell, before Salaman was written, and was succeeded by his son Yaqub. Page 8. Yun. Or Yavin, son of Japhet, from whom the country was called Hunain, Ionia, meant by the Persians to express Greece generally. Sikander is, of course, Alexander the Great, of whose ethics Jami wrote, as Nizami of his deeds. Page 9. Kaf. The fabulous mountain supposed by Asiatics to surround the world, binding the horizon on all sides. Page 9. Sarab. Mirage, but, of two foreign words, why not the more original Persian? Identical with the Hebrew sharab, as in Isaiah 15. 7. The sharab or mirage shall become a lake, rather, and better, than our version, the parched ground shall become a pool. See Jacenius. Page 11. The deluge, in the Quran God engages to save Noah and his family, meaning all who believed in the warning. One of Noah's sons, Canaan or Yam, some think, would not believe. And the ark swam with them between waves like mountains, and Noah called up to his son, who was separated from him, saying, Embark with us, my son, and stay not with the unbelievers. He answered, I will get on a mountain which will secure me from the water. Noah replied, There is no security this day from the decree of God, except for him on whom he shall have mercy. And a wave passed between them, and he became one of those who were drowned. And it was said, O earth, swallow up thy waters, and thou, O heaven, withhold thy rain. And immediately the water abated and the decree was fulfilled, and the ark rested on the mountain Al-Judi, and it was said, Away with the ungodly people. Noah called upon his Lord and said, O Lord, verily my son is of my family, and thy promise is true, for thou art of those who exercise judgment. God answered, O Noah, verily he is not of thy family. This intercession of thine for him is not a righteous work. Sales Quran, Volume 2. Page 21. Page 13. A ring to lead by. Mihar, a piece of wood put through a camel's nose to guide him by. Page 14. Salaman and Balkis. Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Page 15. Musulman is very usually derived from the same Salem element as Solomon. So, Solomon, etc. Page 16. The eye's baby, literally, Mardamak, the mannequin, or pupil, of the eye, corresponding to the image so frequently used by our old poets. Page 17. Years and courage, the same Persian word serving for both. Page 17. The ball. The game of Chugan, for centuries the royal game of Persia, and adopted, Ousley thinks, under varying modifications of name and practice by other nations, was played by horsemen, suitably habited, and armed with semicircular-headed bats or sticks so short the player must stoop below the saddle-bow to strike, strove to drive a ball through a goal of upright pillars. See frontispiece and appendix. Page 18. Fitting the cord. Bows being so gradually stiffened, to the age and strength of the archer, as at last to need 500 weight of pressure to bend, says an old translation of Chardin, who describes all the process up to bringing up the string to the ear, as if to hang it there, before shooting. Then the first trial was, who could shoot highest, then, the mark, etc. Premierment, bander lark. Don't lark consiste le bien tenor, le bander, et laisser partir la corde l'ace, sans que la main gauche que tient l'arc, et que est tout attendu, en la main droite que manier la corde, remuant le moins du monde. En en don diabord diaces bander, pousse de plus deux par degras. Les maîtres de ces exercises apprenant bander l'arc devant soi, derrière soi, côte de soi, en haut, en bas, bref, en cent postures difference, toujours vite et acement. Ilsont de arcs fort difficiles bander, et, pour essayer la force, en les pen contre un mur un cheville, et en attaché de poids à la corde de l'arc l'endroit en appui la coche de la flèche. Les plus deux portent 500 peasant avant d'être bands, etc., Sir John Chardin, Volume 3. 437. He elsewhere says, La bont d'un arc consiste, comme on le dit en Perse, nce diabord il soit rude bander, jusqu'où que la flèche soit à moitié decis. Et chu, en sut il soit mau ets, jusqu'où que le bout de la flèche soit entré dans la corde. Page 19. The Pleiades. I.e. compactly strung, as opposed to discursive rhetoric, which is compared to the scattered stars of the bier and its mourners, or what we call the Great Bear. This contrast is otherwise prettily applied in the Anvari so highly, when one grows poor, his friends, heretofore compact as the Pleiades, disperse wide asunder as the mourners. Page 19. Haddam's bounty. The Persian type of liberality, infinitely celebrated. Page 20. An alien Shadat, the hero of the story being of Hunain, Ionia, or Greece generally, the Persian geography not being very precise, and so not of the faith. Page 21. Adorning the bows, with dark indigo paint, as the archery bow with a thin papyrus-like bark. Page 21. A grain of musk. A patch, sc, nor cum le musk. De Sacy. Page 23. Fortune's shadow. Alluding to the phoenix, the shadow of whose wings foretold a crown upon the head it passed over. Page 27 and elsewhere, the throne is spoken of as underfoot. The Persepolitan sculpture still discovers its king keeping his chair as Europeans do with a separate footstool. But in Jami's time the throne was probably of the same fashion that Chardin saw Solomon twice crowned on 200 years after, perhaps the very same, un petit tabouret care, 3 feet high, golden and jeweled, on which the prince gathers up his feet in oriental fashion, so as it serves for throne and footstool too. Ce tabouret, or le temps il sert à cette cérémonie se garde avec grand soin dans le trésor royal que est au dungeon de la forteresse d'Ispahan, where also, to prove the conservatism of Persia so far as habits go, Jivu, he says. De habits de Tamerlan. Ils sont tales tout comme ce qu'on fait aujourd'hui, sans aucune différence. So the mirrors used in Persia 200 years ago were commonly of polished metal, just as Jami so often describes. Solomon's second coronation came about because of his having fallen so ill from debauchery. That his astrologers said his first must have taken place under an evil conjunction of stars, so he must be crowned again, which he was, Chardin looking on both times. Page 27. Raksh. Lightning. The name of Rustam's famous horse in the Shahnameh. Page 27. Kai, which almost signifies gigantic king, properly belongs to Khusro, third king of the Kayanian dynasty. But is here borrowed for Perviz as a more mythical title than Shah or king. Page 27. Khusro Perviz, Khosrok the victorious, son of Nashirvan the Great. Slain, after 30 years of prosperous reign, by his son Shirway, who, according to some, was in love with his father's mistress Shiren. See further, section XXI, for one of the most dramatic tragedies in Persian history. Page 28. The pen of Kuan Esto. The famous passage of creation stolen from Genesis by the Quran. Page 28. 7 and 4, planets, adding sun, moon, and the nodal dragon's head and tail, according to the Sanskrit astronomy adopted by Persia. I have proposed the planets for those mysterious 7 and 4. But there is a large choice, especially for the ever-mystical 7 commandments, 7 climates, 7 heavens, etc. The 4 may be the 4 elements or even the 4 acknowledged Mohammedan Gospels, namely, the Pentateuch, Psalms, New Testament, and Quran. For Solomon, though fabled not of the faith, yet allegorically represents the mirror of all faith, and as the original form of the human soul might be intuitively enlightened with all the revelations that were to be, might even be. In esoteric Sufism, the coming 12th Imam who had read all the previous 11. It being one doctrine in the East that it is ever the last and most perfect prophet who was first created and reserved in the interior heaven nearest to God till the time of his mission should come. Sir John Chardin quotes 7 Magnificats written in gold upon azure over Shah Abbas' tomb in the great mosque at Qom, composed, he says, par le Dr. Hassan Kazi, mainly in glory of Ali the darling Imam of Persia. But of which the first hymn, est tout de Muhammad. This has some passages so very parallel with the sages addressed to Solomon, that, knowing how little worth such parallels are, especially in a country where magnificent titles of honor are stereotyped ready to be lavished on prophet or Khan, nevertheless really seemed borrowed by le Dr. Hassan Kazi, who probably was hard set to invent any new. They show at least how Jámi saluted his alien prince with titles due to Muhammad's self, and may perhaps light any curious reader to a better understanding of these 7 and 4. He calls Muhammad, infallible expositeur de quatre livres, those Gospels, so Sir John, but the Quran being one, this looks rather addressed to Ali than Muhammad. Conducteur de huit mobiles, the 8 heavens of the planets, says the editor. Gouverneur de September parties, the climates, archetype de choses créées, instrument de la création du monde, le plus relève de la race d'Adam. Ce painter incomprehensible, que attire tout d'un seul coup de pinceau, qu'une fécond, n'a jamais fait un si beau portrait que le globe de ton visage. Page 29. The 10 intelligences. This passage finds its explanation in the last section. Page 32. Gao and Mahi. The bull and fish, the lowest substantial base of earth. He first made the mountains, then cleared the face of earth from sea, then fixed it fast on Gao, Gao on Mahi, and Mahi on air, and air on what? On nothing. Nothing upon nothing, all is nothing, enough. Adder quoted in De Sacis Pendima, XXXV. Page 32. The sidereal dragon, whose head, according to the Puranic, or poetic, astronomers of the East, devoured the sun and moon in eclipse. But we know, said Ramachandra to Sir W. Jones, that the supposed head and tail of the dragon mean only the nodes, or points formed by intersections of the ecliptic and the moon's orbit. Sir W. Jones Works, Volume 4. p. 74. Page 33. Iram Garden. Muhammad, says Sir W. Jones, in the chapter of the morning, towards the end of his Al-Quran, mentions a garden called Iram, which is no less celebrated by the Asiatic poets than that of the Hesperides by the Greeks. It was planted, as the commentators say, by a king named Shaddad, deep in the sands of Arabia Felix, and was once seen by an Arabian who wandered far into the desert in search of a lost camel. Page 34. Wamik. Another typical lover of Azra, a virgin. Page 35. A mirror. Mythically attributed by the East, and in some wild Western avatar, to this Shah's predecessor, Alexander the Great. Perhaps, v. Hammer thinks, the concave mirror upon the Alexandrian Pharos, which by night projected such a fiery eye over the deep as not only was fabled to exchange glances with that on the Rhodian Colossus, and in Oriental imagination and language to penetrate the world, but by day to reflect it to him who looked therein with eyes to see. The cup of their own Jamshid had, whether full or empty, the same property. And that silver cup found in Benjamin's sack, is not this it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divineth? General XLIV. 5. Our reflecting telescope is going some way to realize the Alexandrian fable. Page 35. The cup of happiness and tears. Kappa alpha tau eta rho alpha mu alpha kappa rho omicron nu delta omicron nu eta kappa alpha delta alpha kappa rho upsilon omega nu kappa iota rho nu omega nu tau epsilon epsilon xi epsilon pi iota nu omicron nu alpha chi rho iota epsilon mu epsilon theta eta nu. Page 36. Hurled him, etc. One story is that Khusro had promised if Farhad cut through a mountain, and brought a stream through, Shiren should be his. Farhad was on the point of achieving his work, when Khusro sent an old woman, here, perhaps, purposely confounded with fate, to tell him Shiren was dead, whereon Farhad threw himself headlong from the rock. The sculpture at Basitnan, or Bezitan, where Rawlinson has deciphered Darius and Xerxes, was traditionally called Farhad's. Page 36. Will discharge. He mesmerizes him. See also further on this power of the will in sections XXI and XXVI. Page 38. The minion. Shah and Shahid, mistress, a sort of punning the Persian poets are fond of. Page 41. Anguish. When the cloud of spring beheld the evil disposition of time, its weeping fell upon the jessamine and hyacinth and wild rose. Hafiz. Page 44. Zura. The planetary and celestial Venus. Page 45. The spirit. Mani. The mystical password of the Sufis, to express the transcendental new birth of the soul. Page 46. My son. One sees Jami taking advantage of his allegorical Shah to read a lesson to the real, whose ears advice, unlike praise, scarce ever reached unless obliquely. The warning, and doubtless with good reason, is principally aimed at the minister. Page 49. The story is of generals, though enacted by particulars. Page 50. These intelligences are only another form of the Neoplatonic demons. The Neoplatonists held that matter and spirit could have no intercourse, they were, as it were, incommensurate. How then, granting this premise, was creation possible? Their answer was a kind of gradual elimination. God that actus purus, created an eon, this eon created a second. And so on, until the 10th eon was sufficiently material, as the 10 were in a continually descending series, to affect matter, and so cause the creation by giving to matter the spiritual form. Similarly we have in Sufism these 10 intelligences in a corresponding series, and for the same end. There are 10 intelligences, and 9 heavenly spheres, of which the 9th is the uppermost heaven, appropriated to the first intelligence. The 8th, that of the zodiac, to the 2nd, the 7th, Saturn, to the 3rd, the 6th, Jupiter, to the 4th, the 5th, Mars, to the 5th, the 4th, the Sun, to the 6th, the 3rd, Venus, to the 7th. The 2nd, Mercury, to the 8th, the 1st, the Moon, to the 9th, and the Earth is the peculiar sphere of the 10th, or lowest intelligence, cell the active.